some point this offseason. A guy who is going to be traded is Jalen Ramsey, who's going from the Rams to the Miami Dolphins in exchange for a third-round pick and tight end Hunter Long. This is a cash dump for the Rams. They're taking a big dead money hit on Jalen Ramsey, kind of starting the process of dismantling their Super Bowl team and rebuilding with some draft picks, which, as we all know, they have to replenish their stock of draft picks. Ramsey goes to Miami, a team that is probably a lot more focused on contending this year than the Rams are.
Well, look, I mean, RG3 pointed that out. Look at the tweet that he had up moments after this deal was announced. The Dolphins now have 2 number 1 wide receivers, 2 number 1 corners. Your defense has to deal with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Your offense has to throw against Ramsey and Xavier and Howard. Lord have mercy, says RG3. And I would throw in there as a reminder, they also traded for Bradley Chubb during the season last year. So the Dolphins, Dan Orlovsky, are going for it right now. Where do they fall, in your mind, in the pecking order of the AFC?
Yeah, legit AFC title contenders if they stay healthy. And the AFC we know is absolutely loaded. I think the reality is this. When Tua was healthy last year, this was the best pass offense in football. He averaged 8.9 yards per attempt, 13.7 yards per completion. Those both statistically led the NFL. I mean, just for more context, their offense, when he was healthy, playing quarterback, 6.7 yards per play. The Chiefs, led by Patrick Mahomes, averaged 6.4. So there is this reality. Tua, go do it again. Can you do it 2 years in a row performance-wise? And can you finally stay healthy? But if that happens, this is a team that could be legit AFC title contender, AFC championship title contenders. And I think that's the big question moving forward for this organization. I thought it was a no-brainer to pick up his 5th-year option, given the performance he had on the field. And no one is a bigger fan of the kid than I am, so I hope it happens for him.
So let's make sure everyone knows what Dan is talking about, because we hadn't mentioned it. But Tua Tagovailoa, one of the many things that happened this weekend was that the Dolphins told him that they are picking up his 5th-year option, which they did not have to do until May 1st, is
May
it?
3rd, or first week of May.
Sometime then. So that not only they didn't have to do it at all, but then they don't have to do it until sometime in May. They've reportedly said that they are picking up his 5th-year option now. Mike Tannenbaum, as a former general manager, you were telling me this morning you found that curious.
Yeah, the decision itself is understandable, but the timing is really curious from this standpoint. As Hembo reminded me, Tua's only played 71% of the snaps since he's been the starter, which is remarkably low. So there's no sense of urgency. He's under contract this year, Greeny, and you have until May. So who knows what's going to happen? We've seen the NFL. Things can change. Obviously, Tom Brady's out there. Reportedly, he has reasons for in his personal life to be by Miami. What happens if Aaron Rodgers wakes up and say, hey, I want to play in a warm climate? A lot of things can happen between now and May. There's no urgency to make this decision.
Graziano, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with Mike. It was a surprising move. You haven't seen anyone else pick up their player's 5th-year option for 2024 yet, and you don't have to do it yet. They are building a contending roster in Miami. They had one last year. They made the playoffs. They've added to it with Jalen Ramsey. They seem like a win-now team. Tua Tagovailoa, for better or for worse, is a quarterback that comes with question marks going into the 2023 season because of the health issues that he has had since he entered the league. Not because of what kind of player he is, but because he hasn't been able to stay on the field. So you're building a roster for a quarterback that you may not be able to count on, and you're building a roster that it looks like you're trying to win the Super Bowl with. There are people around the league, and Mike T just referenced it, that are still convinced, again, this is outside speculation, they're still convinced that Tom Brady ends up there because they've tried so hard over the last couple of years to get him. Brady has said he's retired. People close to him insist he's retired. So we take that at its on face value. But it feels like the Dolphins should sort of be thinking bigger at the quarterback position. And I don't know why they would rush to pick up the 5th-year option when they don't have to.
Orlovsky, final word, go.
The Dolphins should be thinking bigger. They were the number 1 pass offense in the NFL when Tua played. Well, the Dolphins last week just watched. But the Dolphins, but we live in this. The health thing I understand, but give me the reasoning or the theory behind not picking the 5th-year option up.
The health thing.
Dan,
that's the reason.
I love you. We just watched the Giants give Daniel Jones $84 million guaranteed in his first 2 years. He never performed the way Tua did last year. Never.
Dan, you're missing the point. I'm not questioning the decision in as much the timing of the decision. Because in 2 months, something may happen in the next 2 months. You may come out of retirement, Dan. Who knows? Something may happen in the next 2 months that makes the Dolphins say, well, wait a second. It could be
What
Tom
happens
Brady.
if they
but
don't want Tom Brady? What happens if they don't want Aaron Rodgers? What happens if in their organization they sit there and go, we have this young player who's a really, really, really good player that we think we could win a ton of games with? We don't want Tom Brady and we don't want Aaron Rodgers. We want to build around Tua.
They wanted Tom Brady so badly that they broke the rules and lost a first-round draft
last
pick
year.
in an effort to get him. Yeah, well, Tua was on the team last year too. I'm just saying, like it's odd that they would rush to make that decision when they don't have to.
Yeah, look, neither one. You don't have to be wrong. I mean, or you don't have to be saying the other is wrong. Dan is just saying they are excited Tua as their quarterback. And the point is, they made a move they didn't have to make that could still have been made well before the season begins. So the timing, maybe it is showing, their commitment to him. The Bears are going to make the playoffs now, in part because they got DJ Moore in that deal. Would that be fact or fiction?
I'm going to go with fiction just because I think they're more than one off season away in Chicago. I expect them to be better, but I think the Lions are going to be a force to be reckoned with in that division. Minnesota is probably going to be better on defense coming off a 13-win season. I think the Bears are more than one off-season rebuild away from being content.
Well, DJ Moore could be a guy they really needed. He hauled in a career-high 7 touchdowns last year, had 1,000-yard receiving in 3 of his first 5 years, and now joins a skill position group that, look, maybe not the best in the league, but they got a bunch of good young players there. Cole Kmet, a good tight end. You've seen, we like Khalil Herbert. They've got the 9th pick in the draft to play around with now. We'll see what they wind up doing here. That's what they got from Carolina, among many other things in this deal. So I turn to you, Mike Tannenbaum. You're a general manager. How did you think Chicago did in this trade of sending away the #1 pick?
I like the trade. I thought they got really good value for trading back 8 spots. But ultimately, this will come down to, Greeny, is Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Justin Fields. Who is the best quarterback of those 3? And my concern about Justin Fields remains the same. As Hembo has reminded me, he has 140 sacks, turnovers, and interceptions over the last 2 years, the most of any quarterback in the NFL, and he's only played 27 out of possible 34 games. Now, look, he hasn't had a lot to work with, offensive line skill players. That's been well documented. But when you have that many negative plays, that is alarming. I love C.J. Stroud. I love Bryce Young. I've been on the record. I would take Bryce Young over Justin Fields. That would have been my decision. But, Greeny, in terms of the trade, they did a great job of maximizing value.
That's what's going to be watched here going forward. People will remember that decision. Quarterback decisions get made. Orlovsky, how do you see, A, the decision, and B, now that it's been made, what does this all mean for Fields in Chicago?
Justin Fields will play MVP-level football for the next 2 seasons. And that's what the Bears believe, and this trade helps that. I like the trade for both places. Carolina needed to jump, and now Justin Fields has a chance. I mean, Mike T, when you say he hasn't had a lot to work with, I would argue that, like, he's had the worst situation in the NFL to work with. And I understand that you point out 140 sacks, interceptions, and the turnovers or whatever. How many of those are sacks? Of course he was sacked a ton. It was the worst offensive line in football. Now he has competent help around him. I would pose this question because everyone is going to correlate this situation to Jalen Hurts. I'd also correlate this situation to, Josh Allen in Buffalo. Who was more impressive their first 2 years in the NFL, as players in the NFL? Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts? Justin Fields and Josh Allen? Who's been more impressive their first 2 years in the NFL? Justin Fields and what he did with what he had is actually more impressive than the first 2 years of Jalen Hurts' career or the first 2 years of Josh Allen's career. And then both those teams said, we're going to get you help. And look what those 2 players blossomed into. Justin Fields is going to play awesome for the next 2 years.
I think that's reasonable to say. I would throw into the equation because I understand that some of the advanced metrics show that some of the turnovers and some of the sacks were actually Fields' fault and not the result of a bad offensive line. He's had new offenses both years that he's been there, right? They fired the coach after the first year. The first year, the coaching seemed uncertain about whether they really wanted to go with him or not. They were absolutely lame ducks going into the beginning of that year. Fields has had everything in the world working against him. That doesn't mean he's better than C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young, but there are a lot of reasons.
And the Bears have made the decision to focus on the positives they saw from him this year as opposed to the negatives and think he can build on those if they help him out. To that point, DJ Moore was a critical part of this trade. They had talks with other teams. The Raiders, I am told, were in on this and had a very similar framework in place to move up from 7 to 1 to get a quarterback, but they didn't have the DJ Moore type piece that Chicago was looking for. So think about that. That's 2 big spots that Chicago's back at 9 instead of 7. That's how important it was for them to get this kind of player because they feel like he's the kind of receiver that Justin Fields needs. Works well in the middle of the field, a place where Justin Fields likes to operate. So this is their focus on making the team around Justin Fields better this offseason.
Wait a minute. So what you're telling me is that the Raiders were in on this trade,
yes, that they were one of the teams
for the number 1 pick.
Yeah.
And up until Friday is when the deal got made, right? That the trade took place on Friday night. And then all of a sudden, the Aaron Rodgers New York Jets talks got a little.
Oh, are you doing?
I don't want to start doing the windy fingers.
I think you do want to do that.
But I mean, that's very strange. That's a very, very strange.
It is very strange.
Coincidence that all of a sudden the Raiders lost the opportunity to get the number 1 pick, and then Aaron Rodgers ghosted the Jets. That just strikes me as a very strange coincidence.
And Greeny, I'll say this. I never understood why the Raiders were not in on Aaron Rodgers. To me, it makes too much sense, despite what's going on right now. I just feel like when you look at Aaron Rodgers and being close to California, being reunited with Devontae Adams, and they need a quarterback, it makes sense to me.
Look, I just need to entertain myself. Do you understand that, people? I'm doing the best I can to hold this together. All things considered, I think I'm doing it remarkably well. Do I have to? That's it. I mean, that's Riddick. He came up with the genius moment. And look, I hope to God I'm wrong. And we will see. We'll ask Shefty. Graziano does it. It's not, to be clear, you're not telling me
but I mean,
that the Raiders were in on it. It
Shefty
just sort of
starts
feels
the show
like
by saying it's either retirement or the Jets. Right? But, I mean, he also said, no, it could be another team. I mean, I don't know.
No one knows because it's Aaron Rodgers, and that's, I guess, what we all, and by we, I mean me, have to get used to living with. The Dolphins have become the going for a team in the NFL right now, right? Sure. And they're almost the same way the Rams were before them. They trade for Bradley Chubb last year. They trade for Jalen Ramsey now. By the way, they informed Tua Tagovailoa that they plan to pick up his 5th-year option, which to this point they have not. But so it looks like they've got their quarterback in place. Louis Riddick. As we sit back and analyze, sort of contemplate the best teams in the AFC, should the Dolphins be right up there at the top?
There's no question about it. If they have all their players healthy and everybody's on the field, there's absolutely no question about it. I think we saw in the playoffs and we saw down the stretch here that they were very, very thin in the secondary as far as playmakers were concerned. And they needed some help. They needed reinforcements. They needed a movable chess piece to go along with some of the other real fine weapons that they have on that side of the ball in the secondary. Think about Jalen Ramsey and Javon Holland, 2 of the most dynamic athletes to play in the back end and movable chess pieces. And think about this too now. Jalen Ramsey's going to hit the ground running down there because Vic Fangio, guess who he tutored? He tutored Brandon Staley. What did Brandon Staley do with Jalen Ramsey when he had him at L.A.? He moved him into the star position. All of a sudden the star, the nickel, the guy who plays the 5th defensive back position in sub, became the buzzword all through the NFL. And that was because of the way that Brandon Staley deployed Jalen Ramsey. What do you think Vic's going to do with this guy? What do you think this defense is going to look like now, especially if he can get the defensive front and the pass rush to really ramp it up? Bradley Chubb has to ramp it up. Jalen Phillips has to take another step. And they look, when you put this all together, and if on offense, Tua can stay healthy, and we know that is a big question, I get that. This team is ready to rock and roll. This team is ready to rock and roll and make some noise in the AFC. No question about it.
I agree. Orlovsky, let's talk here. This is a team that playing with its 3rd-string quarterback, Skylar Thompson, lost by a field goal on the road in the playoff game at Buffalo. I mean, if Tua is healthy, and with him we know that's a very big if, this feels like a very dangerous team.
There's no doubt about it. There's 2 AFC elite teams. Elite. You got to go chase them down. Kansas City, the Super Bowl champion, and then Cincinnati. We know those 2 teams are going to be great this year again as we sit here early March. And then there's this group of teams that is really, really, really good. Miami is in that group. It's Miami. It's Buffalo. It's the Los Angeles Chargers. It's probably going to be Jacksonville this year. There might be another team or two in that conversation as well. Baltimore if they keep Lamar. So now we're looking at a roster that has weapons on the outside. They have a quarterback that played tremendous football last year when he was healthy. He's got to stay healthy. And they got a defense that can hunt. To Lewis's point, if everyone hangs around, is it able to play? I don't even care about September that much. Is healthiest in December and January. This is a team that could be AFC title contenders. And then we're having a conversation of can they go on a playoff and or Super Bowl run? They got to run the football a little bit better, but this is a really good roster.
You know, I think.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lewis.
No, I was going to say, I think that's probably the number one point, just from the way in which they manage football games, that really needs to be watched this year. When Mike McDaniel, I'm not saying, look, he has to run the ball 30 times a game. Right. I'm saying when he strategically and smartly runs the football, this offense is virtually unstoppable.
Yep.
It's unstoppable. Simple as that.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.